We'll be getting started soon. All right, so we're going to go through this congressional testimony and start taking notes. Just a bit of a study of the situation.
The preeminent law enforcement agency in the world failed in its fundamental mission of adherence to the rule of law. And unfortunately, I think once again, the Democrats will say, we don't care. It doesn't matter. We're never going to stop going after President Trump. In fact, 8 days ago, we saw how far they are willing to go
How far
with
will
the
they go?
indictment of President Trump. But frankly, this shouldn't surprise us. They told us their objective. In fact, it was an agent on the case of Crossfire Hurricane who told us what their objective was. We all remember the text message from Peter Strzok where he said, don't worry, we'll stop Trump. It started with the Crossfire Hurricane investigation. Mr. Durham has told us how wrong that was. Now we have an indictment of a former president who's winning in every single poll by his opponent's Justice Department. And in between those two events, we had the Mueller investigation, we had impeachment, we had 51 former intel officials falsely tell us the Biden laptop was Russian disinformation. We had a raid on President Trump's home. And of course, we got Alvin Bragg's ridiculous case in New York. 7 years, nothing has changed. Don't believe me? We interviewed Stephen D'Antuono, former head of the Washington field office when the Trump classified document case began. Mr. D'Antuono told the committee, interviewed him just 2 weeks ago today. Mr. D'Antuono told the committee that when he asked the Department of Justice, why is there no U.S. attorney assigned to the Trump classified document case? Headquarters said, because we're running it. He suggested the Miami field office should do the raid. Instead of sending the folks from Washington field office down to Miami, have the folks in the Miami field office do it. Headquarters said no. He suggested there shouldn't be a raid. Instead, they should continue to work with President Trump's lawyers. Once again, headquarters said no. Mr. D'Antuono even said, how about when we get there? When we arrive at President Trump's home, we then call his lawyer and we do the search together. Again, headquarters said no. Another interesting fact, the lawyer who turned down Mr. D'Antuono's request happens to be the same person who is alleged to have pressured the attorney representing a Trump employee about a judgeship. Nothing has changed, and frankly, they're never going to stop. 7 years of attacking Trump is scary enough, but what's more frightening, any one of us could be next. In fact, it's already started. Parents at school board meetings are terrorists. Pro-life Catholics are extremists. Even journalists aren't safe. Federal Trade Commission, 13 letters. One of those letters to Twitter said, who are the journalists you're talking to? Think about that. They named 4 people personally. 2 come and testify in front of this committee. While they're in front of this committee, Democrats are asking them to reveal their sources, violate First Amendment principles. One of them, Matt Taibbi, while he's sitting at that table testifying to the Judiciary Committee, the IRS is knocking on his door. Parents, Catholics, journalists, but guess who gets it the worst? Guess who gets it the worst? Whistleblowers. If you dare come forward and tell Congress what's going on, look out. They will come for you. They will take your clearance. They will take your pay. They'll even take your kids' clothes. Just ask Garrett O'Boyle, who testified in front of this committee as well. Over the next few hours, we're going to hear the facts and details about the whole false Trump-Russian narrative, the Crossfire Hurricane investigation, and hopefully it will help change things at the Department of Justice.
Hopefully we get a better
Regardless of
understanding
what
of
the
the
Biden
situation.
administration and the Garland Justice Department do, I know what Republicans in the House are committed to doing. We will work to dramatically change the FISA law, and we will do everything we can in the appropriations process to stop the federal government from going after the American people. Now I recognize the ranking member for an opening statement.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On June 8th, a grand jury in Miami indicted former President Trump on 37 counts related to his mishandling of extraordinarily sensitive national security information, including information regarding defense and weapons capabilities of both the United States and foreign countries, United States nuclear programs, potential vulnerabilities of the United States and its allies to military attack, and plans for possible retaliation in response to a foreign attack. According to the indictment, the unauthorized disclosure of these classified documents could put at risk the national security of the United States, foreign relations, the safety of the United States military, and human sources,
We're talking about the classified documents now?
of sensitive intelligence
This is the
collection
Durham
methods.
hearing.
And indeed, the indictment goes on to describe how the former president made such unauthorized disclosures. Even if you believe, as Chairman Jordan claims, that President Trump has committed no crime, surely we can agree that it is dangerous and profoundly irresponsible to have taken these documents from the White House and left them
Look at this recent thing I'm
unsecured in
pointing
Mar-a-Lago.
at. That means Trump is guilty of Crossfire
Don't take
Hurricane.
just my word for it. Trump's Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, said that the former president's handling of this information put U.S. service members' lives and our national security at risk. And Trump's handpicked Attorney General, Bill Barr, with whom I agree on very little, hit the nail on the head when he described the former
Whom I
president's
agree on
legal
very
troubles
little.
as, quote,
Okay.
entirely of his own making. He had no right to these documents. The government tried for over a year, quietly and with respect, to get them back, and he jerked them around. When he faced a subpoena, he didn't raise any legal arguments. He engaged in a course of deceitful conduct. That was a clear crime if those allegations are true, close quote. The former president could have, at any time, for months, simply returned the documents and avoided prosecution. But House Republicans do not want to talk about any of that. They seem incapable of assigning any agency or responsibility to Donald Trump for problems that are Trump's and Trump's alone. Instead, Republicans have planned this hearing and constructed an entire false narrative around this work of Special Counsel Durham in an effort to distract from the former president's legal troubles and mislead the American public. To be clear, the Durham report is by itself a deeply flawed vessel. After 4 years, thousands of employee hours, and more than $6.5 million in taxpayer dollars, Special Counsel Durham failed to uncover any wrongdoing that Justice Department Inspector General Horowitz had not already found in 2019. He brought just 2 cases to trial and lost them both. Both defendants were acquitted in mere hours. The single conviction that Special Counsel Durham obtained involved a single charge of lying to the FBI, a case developed and handed to him by the Inspector General, and one resolved by a quick plea bargain. The report itself outlined some fairly glaring investigative missteps. The FBI apparently never even looked at a thumb drive of key evidence related to allegations of contact between the Trump campaign and the Russian government via a Russian cell phone. Nor, says the report, did the FBI ever examine questionable computer contacts between the Trump Organization and Alfa Bank, one of the largest banks in Russia. The report also fails to recommend a single remedial measure that the Justice Department or the FBI might take to address certain process-related concerns, largely because DOJ and FBI have already implemented the changes recommended by the Inspector General 3.5 years ago. Now, I understand that, like the former president, many MAGA Republicans had a lot riding on the Durham investigation. I understand that they might be disappointed with where it landed, but that is no excuse for making things up. First, the Durham report unequivocally concludes that the FBI not only had the evidence to open an investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election, but actually had an affirmative obligation to investigate ties between the Russian government and the Trump campaign. It is simply not true, as some Republicans have claimed, that the Durham report suggests that there should not have been an investigation. Affirmative obligation. Those are Mr. Durham's words, not mine. Second, the Durham report shows that the FBI began its investigation when an aide to the Trump campaign disclosed in May 2016 that the campaign knew that Russia had thousands of emails that would embarrass Hillary Clinton. The aide bragged about it at a bar. An Australian diplomat who overheard the remark reported it, and the investigation began. It is simply not true, as the most extreme voices in this room have claimed, that the investigation was somehow launched by the Clinton campaign. That particular conspiracy theory is off by several months. Nor is it true that the FBI was opposed to Trump from the beginning. For example, the Durham report tells us that the FBI encouraged a confidential human source to infiltrate the Clinton campaign, not the Trump campaign, and take steps to entrap, unsuccessfully, aides to Secretary Clinton. This story is right there on pages 74 and 75 of the report. I suspect we won't hear a word about it from House Republicans today because it does not fit the MAGA narrative. Finally, nothing in the Durham report disputes the central findings of Special Counsel Robert Mueller. Namely, Russia interfered in the 2016 election. It did so to help Donald Trump, and the Trump campaign welcomed this interference. This last point is important because it tells us how Mr. Durham became special counsel in the first place, and it goes to the heart of the fully false narrative of MAGA victimhood. From the day that Special Counsel Mueller began his work, Donald Trump and his political allies have railed...
We can fact check there. We can fact check the question, are Mueller's central findings of Russia collusion not disputed by the Durham report? So we have this site. It's called Chat PDF. Here's the Durham report loaded. You can basically use Chat PDF to just ask an AI questions about the document. So we'll go ahead and do that here. So does this report support the conclusion that see what it says here. Okay, so it was basically the AI bot that analyzed the document does not seem to agree. The report does not explicitly support the conclusion that Russia colluded in support of Trump during the 2016 selection. On page 73, it is stated that the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its selection interference activities. Additionally, on page 73, it is mentioned that the evidence was not sufficient to charge any member of the Trump campaign with conspiring with representatives of Rus to interfere with the selection. However, it is important to note that this report is focused on intelligence activities and investigations arising out of the campaigns. It may not provide a comprehensive analysis of all aspects of interference. Okay, well, there's a first ding. All right.
Against an imagined conspiracy against the former president. The Russia investigation was a setup. It was a witch hunt. Obama did it. We need to investigate the investigators. Then came the Mueller report. The Mueller report was delivered to Attorney General Barr on Friday, March 22nd, 2019. The next Monday, Mr. Durham was in Barr's office. A week later, a colleague emailed Mr. Durham to ask about, quote, the project that Durham and Barr were working on. While we on this committee were fighting to get access to the Mueller report, Mr. Durham was already working on an investigation to undercut its central findings. A few weeks later, the Trump administration announced Mr. Durham's investigation into the investigators. And by August 2019, Mr. Durham and Attorney General Barr were on a plane to Europe, jointly hunting down non-existent evidence of Donald Trump's deep state conspiracy theories.
Think about how just ridiculous this sounds in light of all the recent clips we have of Bill Barr completely burying Trump and just showing complete opposition against the former president. It just doesn't even make logical sense what he's saying. I guess, Barr had his conversion period during the 2020 season. I don't know.
If the duo ever found evidence proving that Donald Trump was right all along, that evidence certainly never made it into the Durham report. It has been alleged, however, that they found evidence implicating the former president in certain financial crimes during their trip. Incidentally, that information too is missing from Mr. Durham's final pages. When he could not give Donald Trump evidence of a deep state conspiracy, Mr. Durham gave him the next best thing, a public narrative with Hillary Clinton as the villain. Over the ensuing years, Mr. Durham constructed a flimsy story built on shaky inferences and dog whistles to far-right conspiracy theorists. Although he lost both times, he took a case to trial. By prolonging his investigation...
Well, first of all, Durham wasn't dog whistling anything. That was just all the influencers out there, and including the chief one, number 17, who on the boards just had Durham as its own sentence. John Durham himself wasn't putting any chum out there.
Durham was able to keep Donald Trump's talking points in the news long after Trump left office. With a loose approach to DOJ norms, protecting the reputation of the agency, and a cavalier disregard for the privacy and reputational rights of others, Mr. Durham's investigation operated as headline generator for MAGA Republicans. Less than half a year into his 4-year investigation, Mr. Durham publicly disputed Inspector General Horowitz's conclusion that the FBI was warranted in opening a full investigation, in violation of DOJ rules protecting investigations from appearances of political bias. Mr. Durham similarly flouted guidelines designed to protect third parties from reputational injury when he used his 2 indictments to accuse the Clinton campaign of a vast conspiracy to tie Trump to Russia. But at the end of the day, Mr. Durham never found what he was looking for.
I don't know how to fact check that just a second, but let's go ahead and just take note of that claim. Maybe have to fact check that in just a bit. I have to go back here to see exactly how I worded that. To
far-right conspiracy theorists. Although he lost both times, he took a case to trial. By prolonging his investigation, Durham was able to keep Donald Trump's talking points in the news long after Trump left office. With a loose approach to DOJ norms, protecting the reputation of the agency, and a cavalier disregard for the privacy and reputational rights of others, Mr. Durham's investigation operated as headline generator for MAGA Republicans. Less than half a year into his 4-year investigation, Mr. Durham publicly disputed Inspector General Horowitz's conclusion that the FBI was warranted in opening a full investigation, in violation of DOJ rules protecting investigations from appearances of political bias.
Okay. $25, $23. Let's go to $25, $12.
Inspector General Horowitz's conclusion that the FBI was warranted in opening a full investigation, in violation of DOJ rules protecting investigations from appearances of political bias.
I'm just going to go back a little bit further. YouTube doesn't really allow you to.
To far-right conspiracy theorists. Although he lost both times, he took a case to trial. By prolonging his investigation, Durham was able to keep Donald Trump's talking points in the news long after Trump left office. With a loose approach to DOJ norms, protecting the reputation of the agency, and a cavalier disregard for the privacy and reputational rights of others, Mr. Durham's investigation operated as headline generator for MAGA Republicans. Less than half a year into his 4-year investigation, Mr. Durham publicly disputed Inspector General Horowitz's conclusion that the FBI was warranted in opening a full investigation, in violation of DOJ rules protecting investigations from appearances of political bias. Mr. Durham similarly flouted guidelines designed to protect third parties from reputational injury when he used his 2 indictments to accuse the Clinton campaign of a vast conspiracy to tie Trump to Russia. But at the end of the day, Mr. Durham never found what he was looking for. He cannot dispute a single conclusion in the Mueller report. He cannot prove a magnificent deep state conspiracy. And he cannot say that the FBI investigation into the Trump campaign's many ties to Russia never should have happened. And again, I can see why this would be disappointing to some. But instead of owning up to his failure, the Durham report doubles down on theories that lost spectacularly before 2 unanimous juries. The report also references classified material that has been called likely disinformation to lay out a series of accusations against the former president's perceived enemies. By presenting his so-called findings in this way, swiping a Republican boogeyman and hiding inconvenient truths in footnotes, the Durham report gives Donald Trump one last talking point. It did not have to be this way. It may be hard to remember, but at the outset of the Durham investigation, Mr. Durham was a well-respected career prosecutor with a solid reputation.
Let's not give the Trump administration any more talking points. We want to take any ammo away as we try to bury them in political cases.
Attorney General is supposed to appoint a special counsel to prevent the appearance of politicization in a criminal investigation.
Politicization.
Mr. Durham could well have lived up to that expectation. Instead, what we got was a political exercise that operated with ethical ambiguity and existed to perpetuate Donald Trump's unfounded claims. The investigation failed in its political objectives, but did real damage to a department that is still recovering from the excesses of the Trump administration. And despite Mr. Durham's best efforts, a reckoning is well underway. Do not be misled. Former President Donald Trump is not a victim. He did this to himself. For all of its flaws,
he's not an aggressor. He just hurts
does not
himself.
show that anyone else is responsible for the president's legal woes, past, present, or future.
Our super stable genius. He just does things to undo himself. He just can't help it. He makes bad decisions.
Anyone who tells you otherwise is simply making it up. I thank the chairman, and I yield back.
Without objection, all other opening statements will be included in the record. Today's witness is the Honorable John Durham. Mr. Durham was appointed as a special counsel in 2020 to investigate intelligence activities investigations arising out of the 2016 presidential campaigns. He is a career prosecutor, having served as the U.S. Attorney for the District of Connecticut and in various other roles with that office since 1989. Prior to that, he served with the Department of Justice, the Boston Strike Force on organized crime, and in various state-level prosecutors' offices. We welcome our witness and thank him for appearing today. We will begin by swearing you in. Would you please rise and raise your right hand, Mr. Durham? Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? Let the record show that the witness has answered in the affirmative. Thank you. You may be seated. Please know that your written testimony will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, we ask that you summarize.
I didn't hear him say, "So help me God," so I'm a little bit concerned by that. I guess nodding is sufficient.
Your testimony in 5 minutes, but we'll give you a little extra time if you need it. Mr. Durham, you may begin. Hit your mic there, Mr. Durham, and just keep it on if you can throughout the day.
Maybe it was the mic.
Is it on?
Yep, it's on now. Thank you.
Begin. Good morning, Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Nadler, and members of this committee. As the committee knows, on May 13th, 2019, Attorney General Barr directed me to conduct a preliminary review into certain matters related to federal investigations concerning the 2016 presidential election campaigns. That review subsequently developed into several criminal investigations and gave rise to my subsequent appointment as special counsel in these matters. Many of the most significant issues documented in the report that we have written, including those relating to lack of investigative discipline, failure to take logistical, logical, investigative steps, and bias, are relevant to important national security interests that this committee and the American people are concerned about. If repeated and left unaddressed, these issues could result in significant national security risks and further erode the public's faith and confidence in our justice system. As we said in the report, our findings were sobering. I can tell you, having spent 40 years plus as a federal prosecutor, they were particularly sobering to me. A number of my colleagues who spent decades in the FBI themselves, they were sobering. While I'm encouraged by some of the reforms that have been implemented by the FBI, the problems identified in this report, anybody who actually reads the report and the details of the report, the documented portions of the report, I think would find that the problems identified in the report are not susceptible to overnight fixes. As we said in the report, they cannot be addressed solely by enhancing training or additional policy requirements. Rather, what is required is accountability, both in terms of the standards to which our law enforcement personnel hold themselves and in the consequences they face for violation of laws and policies of relevance. I'm here to answer your questions.
Don's indicating them too far from the mic. Is that true?
I'll answer them to the best of my ability, and I hope to be of service to your oversight function. As I'm sure you know, the Department of Justice has issued some guidelines as to what I'm authorized to discuss and those things that I am not authorized to discuss. In this regard, accordingly, I'll refer principally to the report. I do want to emphasize a few points at the outset, however. First, I want to emphasize in the strongest terms possible that my colleagues and I carried out our work in good faith, with integrity and in the spirit of following the facts wherever they lead, without fear or favor. At no time and in no sense did we act with a purpose to further partisan or political ends. To the extent that somebody suggests otherwise, that's simply untrue and offensive. Second, the findings set forth in this report are serious and deserve attention from the American public and its representatives. Let me just briefly highlight a few of those.
All right.
For one, we found troubling violations of law and policy in the conduct of highly consequential investigations directed at members of a presidential campaign and ultimately a presidential administration. To me, it matters not whether it was a Republican campaign or a Democratic campaign. It was a presidential campaign. Our team comprised dedicated and experienced prosecutors and law enforcement agents who worked day in and day out through the entire COVID epidemic in the office trying to interview people, all in an effort to try to get to those facts and the ground truth. That such a group of people made these findings. Experienced FBI agents, experienced prosecutors, not people by and large from Washington, but from other parts of the country. The fact that these people made these findings, as reflected in the report, is of concern and should be of concern to any American who cares about our civil liberties, the rule of law, and the just and proportionate application of the law to all of us. Whether we're friends or we're foes, the law ought to apply to everybody in the same way. During our investigation, we charged a former FBI agent who pleaded guilty to the felony offense of altering and fabricating a portion of a document used to obtain a court order, a FISA order, of surveillance of a United States citizen, which in our view is a significant problem. Several of the relevant FISA applications at issue in the Crossfire investigation omitted references to what was clearly relevant and highly exculpatory information that should have been disclosed to the FISA court. Multiple FBI personnel who signed or assisted in preparing renewal applications for that same FISA warrant acknowledged that they did not believe that the target, Mr. Page, was a threat to national security, much less a knowing agent of a foreign power, which is what the law requires. It appears from our investigation that the FBI leadership dismissed those concerns. Another aspect of our findings concerned the FBI's failure to sufficiently scrutinize information it received or to apply the same standards to allegations it received about the Clinton and Trump campaigns. As our report details, the FBI was too willing to accept and use politically funded and uncorroborated opposition research, such as the Steele dossier. The FBI relied on the dossier and FISA applications, knowing that it was likely material originating from a political campaign, a political opponent. It did so even after the President of the United States, the FBI and CIA directors and others received briefings about intelligence suggesting that there was a Clinton campaign plan underway to stir up a scandal tying Trump to Russia. The accuracy of the intelligence was uncertain at the time, but the FBI failed to analyze or even assess the implications of the intelligence in any meaningful way. When the FBI learned that the primary source of information for the Steele dossier, which was basically the guts of the narrative about there being a well-coordinated conspiracy involving Trump and the Russians, when they learned that Danchenko was the primary subsource for those reports, it was at the time when the FBI already knew that Danchenko himself had previously been the suspect of an FBI espionage investigation. He was suspected of being a Russian asset. And nonetheless, they signed him up as a paid informant without further investigation of that espionage concern, to say nothing of resolving that espionage matter before using Danchenko and Danchenko's information. And when the FBI and Special Agent Mueller's office learned that Steele's primary subsource likely had gathered important portions of the dossier information during travels to Russia with one Charles Dolan, it inexplicably decided not to interview Dolan or investigate his activities. Finally, I would like to add that although our work exposed deep concerns concerning facts about the conduct of these investigations, our report should not be read to suggest in any way that Russian election interference was not a significant threat. It was. Nor should it be read to suggest that the investigative authorities at issue no longer serve important law enforcement and national security interests. They do. Rather, responsibility for the failures and transgressions that occurred here rests with the people who committed them or allowed them to occur. Again, to my mind, the issues raised in the report deserve close attention from the American people and their elected representatives here in Washington. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so that's the opening statement there.
Mr. Durham. We will now proceed under the 5-minute rule for questions. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Durham, for being here today. This is much anticipated. We have lots of questions for you. I'll try to set the table here at the outset from 20,000 feet. The American people rely on the FBI to abide by its guiding principles, and you know what those are: fidelity, bravery, and integrity. And we rely upon them to uphold the Constitution and protect the American people. Americans deserve and expect from our premier law enforcement agency to apply justice blindly, and that is without political bias or ulterior motives. However, your report now famously states, and here's the big quote, based on the review of Crossfire Hurricane and related intelligence activities, you concluded that the DOJ and FBI failed to uphold their important mission of strict fidelity to the law. There's no other way to put this. The report illustrates egregious actions on behalf of the FBI that have further eroded faith in our institutions. Ms. Durham, in your report, and again here today, you said that your findings and conclusions are sobering. Could you unpack a little bit more what that means? Why do you say sobering?
Well, let me give you some real-life views on that. I have had any number of FBI agents who I've worked with over the years. Some are retired, some are still in place, who have come to me and apologized for the manner in which that investigation was undertaken. I take that seriously. These are good, hardworking, the majority of people in the FBI, decent human beings who swear under their oaths to abide by the law and the like. And I think that exemplifies of the concern here. There are investigative activities undertaken or not undertaken here which raise real concerns about whether or not the law was followed, the policies in place of the FBI were followed.
You wrote in your report, quote, based on the evidence gathered in the multiple exhaustive and costly federal investigations of these matters, including the instant investigation, neither U.S. law enforcement nor the intelligence community appears to have possessed any actual evidence of collusion in their holdings at the commencement of the Crossfire investigation. To date, has any evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia ever been uncovered?
I mean, there is information, obviously, in the report that was prepared by Director Mueller and whatnot. But as to collusion or conspiracy, I'm not aware of any.
And let me stop you. When the FBI opened Crossfire Hurricane, that's the issue at hand, it did not have any information that anyone in the Trump campaign had ever been in contact with Russian intelligence officials. Isn't that right?
As we wrote in the report, talked to the director of the CIA, the deputy director of the CIA, the director of NSA,
not aware of any of it all.
Within the FBI, and there was no such information that they had in their holdings at the time they opened Crossfire Hurricane.
And you detail, I'm going to go quickly here, I run out of time. You detail how FBI personnel working on FISA applications violated protocols. They were cavalier at best, as you said in your own words, towards accuracy and completeness. Senior FBI personnel displayed a serious lack of analytical rigor towards information that they received, especially information received from politically affiliated persons or entities. And you said, quote, a significant reliance on investigative leads provided or funded by Trump's political opponents were relied upon here. Among the most alarming things that you referred to in the report is the impact of confirmation bias. And you said in your report at page 303, that's defined as, or it stands for, the general proposition that there is a common human tendency, mostly unintentional, for people to accept information and evidence that is consistent with what they believe to be true. But sir, here, this wasn't innocent, unintentional human tendency, was it? It was overt political bias, was it not? Peter Strzok, for example.
There are some individuals who clearly expressed a personal bias. It's difficult to get into somebody else's head to see whether they knew it.
Unless we have their emails, right? And Peter Strzok, for example, he had pronounced hostile feelings towards President Trump. Everybody knows that. Everybody in the country knows it. So he was in charge of this. He was the Deputy Assistant Director of Counterintelligence, officially opened the investigation at the direction of Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe. He said horrible things about President Trump and all of his supporters, by the way. How could we say he did not have political bias?
Yeah, I know that.
Okay, so about this question, how does this not amount to treason, especially with clear political slant? Why not treason charges? I think with the spirit of the law on this topic of treason and seditious conspiracy, the object is the destruction of the U.S. government, or like attacking the U.S. government, and then there's a agent carrying out the action that usually represents some foreign infiltrating power whose goal is to lead to that destruction. So I think here there's just an issue of perception and belief as far as could certain Congress people or individuals in the judiciary, could it be on the take to some other power? That's one question. The next question is, necessarily does a power have to be a foreign power? So there's just some confusion in the body politic about these concepts that I think may ultimately prevent more serious talk of treason occurring in this setting. But let's continue.
It clearly reflects a personal bias that he had. I'll leave it to others and the facts that are set out in the reports, whether that's political bias, personal bias, but there's clearly bias.
What we know now is the FBI and the DOJ have been turned into activated political weapons against citizens and even a former president because of their opposing viewpoints, sir. They failed to follow protocols in 2016, and you've suggested new protocols may somehow be affixed to this. How can the American people have confidence that if they didn't follow protocols in 2016, that they will new protocols?
And I think that's why I said that in the opening remarks, this is not an easy fix. I mean, it's going to take time to rebuild the public's confidence in the institution. The changes of the forms they have made are certainly changes that are going to guard to some extent against the repeat of what happened in Crossfire Hurricane.
I'm out of time. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York. Mr. Durham, can you pull that microphone real close so everyone can hear what you say? We appreciate that. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Durham, your report reads like a defense of the Trump campaign and an attack on Hillary Clinton, because that's exactly what it is. Donald Trump wanted you to investigate the investigators to show the deep state conspiracy, but you never found one. Instead, you gave him and his MAGA Republicans the next best thing, someone else to blame for Donald Trump's problems. That's why you're here today, because the chairman and his colleagues need someone, anyone, to deflect from the mounting evidence of Trump's misconduct. Let me remind you that Donald Trump was federally indicted on 37 counts for mishandling classified information. 37 counts. That's why you're here today, not because of anything that happened in 2016. Ms. Durham, your investigation caused more...
Look at this tactician. So he keeps bringing up the current controversy surrounding the classified documents at Mar-a-Lago. He just brings that up to try to shift the focus of, I guess, other people on the committee to that more recent political topic. It's a very interesting psychology at play, or just manipulation of psychology.
More than $6.5 million, involved the work of dozens of FBI employees and federal prosecutors, some of whom resigned in protest and took roughly 4 years to complete. Is that correct?
No.
It's not correct.
No, I mean, there were multiple parts of that.
Did it take 4 years to complete?
Correct.
Okay. And with all these resources and all these people you were sent to help you investigate the investigators, you only filed 3 criminal cases. You only brought 2 cases to trial, correct?
Correct.
And you lost all the cases you brought to trial, correct?
Correct.
In fact, 2 juries acquitted your defendants on all charges. And the one conviction that you obtained, the defendant pleaded guilty to a single count that never went to trial, correct?
Correct.
I will note that in that case, the primary investigative steps were all completed by Inspector General Horowitz. Perhaps you were better when it came to your report. From my reading, your report did not make any specific concrete recommendations to improve DOJ or FBI policies or procedures. In fact, your report repeatedly references the recommendations made by Inspector General Horowitz, almost all of which DOJ and FBI have already implemented. Again, your investigation lasted 4 years. 4 years and untold sums of money, and you still obtained only 1 conviction. You did produce a 300-page report, though, and that's given my Republican counterparts plenty of material to spin. Mr. Durham, George Papadopoulos was a foreign policy advisor to the Trump campaign in spring 2016. Isn't that right?
Correct.
And in May 2016, he told an Australian diplomat that the Trump team had received some kind of suggestion from Russia that it could assist this process with the anonymous release of information during the campaign that would be damaging to Secretary Clinton. This is a fact that came out during the Mueller investigation, and your investigation found nothing to dispute this fact, correct?
There's more detail to that in the report.
Did it find anything to dispute this report, to dispute this fact?
No.
Okay. On page 50 of your report, you wrote that on July 28, 2016, FBI headquarters received the Australian information that formed the basis for the opening of Crossfire Hurricane, correct?
Correct.
So this fantasy that some MAGA Republicans have created, where the investigation was started for any reason other than a Trump campaign operative bragging to Australian intelligence assets about Russian dirt that would damage Hillary Clinton, is not true. And when the FBI received that information, according to your report, it had not just the predication to investigate. There is no question, you wrote, that the FBI had an affirmative obligation to closely examine the Australian information. Isn't that right?
The FBI had an obligation to examine.
So that's correct. So the origin of the investigation was not the Steele dossier. It was not Alpha Bank. It was a Trump aide's loose lips about his campaign's advanced view into a hack that had a profound effect on the 2016 election. That information supplied by the Australian government gave the FBI predication to begin an investigation. I'd like to discuss one more false conclusion about your report that's made its way into the MAGA Republican talking points. Some of my colleagues across the aisle have started calling this the, quote, Russia hoax. It's the theory that Russia did not actually interfere in the 2016 presidential election. That is patently false. In 2017, during the Trump administration, the Director of National Intelligence declassified a report on Russian activity in the 2016 election. You're aware of this report, correct?
Correct.
And in this report, the intelligence community found that, quote, Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered an influence campaign in 2016 aimed at the U.S. presidential election. Russia's goals were to undermine public faith in the U.S. democratic process, denigrate Secretary Clinton, and harm her electability and potential presidency. We further assess Putin and the Russian government developed a clear preference for President-elect Trump, close quote. You did not dispute that Trump ordered an influence campaign to influence the 2016 election in your report, did you?
As I said, there was a real
Yes or
Russian
no?
threat.
No, okay. Special Counsel Mueller indicted 12 Russian intelligence officers in July 2018, isn't that right?
Correct.
the 12 intelligence officers were indicted for attacking the Clinton campaign. On page 55 of your report, you acknowledge that at a press conference in 2016, Donald Trump on camera said, "Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing." Is that correct?
That's correct.
And 2 years later at the Helsinki summit, Trump told the press that he believed Russian President Putin over his own intelligence officials when he told them Russia did not interfere during the 2016 election season. I see my time has expired. I yield back.
Witness can respond if he chooses to. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Fry, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are here today to provide transparency, finally, to the American people. 7 years ago, the FBI launched Crossfire Hurricane, the left's brazen attempt to keep Donald Trump out of the White House. This federal investigation, funded by the Hillary Clinton campaign, caused Americans to believe that then candidate Trump was colluding with Russia in order to win the 2016 presidential election. Mr. Durham has spent 4 years investigating this, 480 witnesses, 6 million pages of documents, 190 subpoenas, and executing 7 search warrants. Less than a month ago, he completed this report that instigated a baseless investigation and launched a partisan attack on President Trump, despite having no true justification to do this. That was the FBI. Within 3 days of receiving the information from a diplomat in Australia, the FBI opened a full-fledged investigation into the Trump campaign. So, Mr. Durham, let's get into this. The FBI opened up Crossfire Hurricane without speaking to the people who provided the initial information. Is that true?
That's correct.
The FBI opened Crossfire Hurricane on a Sunday, only 3 days after reviewing that information. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So just think about that for a moment. An investigation, a full investigation into a presidential campaign over a weekend. Mr. Durham, the FBI opened Crossfire Hurricane without interviewing any of the essential witnesses. Is that true?
That's true.
And the FBI also opened up Crossfire Hurricane without using any of the standard analytical tools typically employed to evaluate that evidence. Is that true?
That's true.
So think about that. The FBI never talked to the people who gave them the intelligence information. They never examined their own witnesses. They never interviewed the witnesses. They never corroborated the dossier. Mr. Durham, if the FBI had done these things, if they had done their homework, would it have found that its own Russian experts had no information about President Trump being involved with Russian leadership or Russian intelligence officials?
Yes.
So then, was there adequate predication for the FBI to open Crossfire Hurricane as a full investigation?
On July 31st, in my view, based on our investigation, there was not a legitimate basis to open as a full investigation. An assessment is something that had to be looked at, gather information, such as interviewing the people who provided the Papadopoulos information, checking their own databases, the databases of other intelligence agencies, and the standard kinds of things that you would do in an investigation like this.
Mr. Durham, I think it's safe to conclude, based on that report and anyone who has read it, that they did not have that adequate basis, as you talked about, to launch this investigation. Let's move on to a second really troubling aspect of your findings. From the report, I gathered that key FBI leaders, all the way at the top, were predisposed to go after candidate Trump. This bias likely affected the conduct of FBI personnel in this investigation. Is that true?
Yes.
Can you describe that for a moment? How did confirmation bias play into this?
Confirmation bias, as was alluded to, has to do with our human tendency to accept things that we already think are true and to reject anything else. In this instance, there are any number of significant red flags that were raised that were simply ignored. If there's evidence that was inconsistent with the narrative, they didn't pay attention to it. They didn't explore it. They didn't take the logical investigative steps that should have been taken.
Let's see how real this bias was. FBI Deputy Assistant Director Peter Strzok drafted and approved the Crossfire Hurricane opening communication. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And in your investigation, your office discovered text messages between Strzok and Lisa Page, who was the special assistant to the FBI Director McCabe, expressing strong bias against candidate Trump.
Okay,
that's true.
That's his key example.
For the record, let me read aloud. This was generated by staff, but this would look like their text messages. On August 18, 2016, Page texted Strzok, "Trump's not going to become president, right? Right?" And Strzok responded by saying, "No, he's not. We'll stop it." It's clear that there was no evidence of Russia collusion with the Trump campaign in 2016.
To me,
the American people deserve the truth.
To me, if this is a real text from Strzok, this does more or less border on treason. Because like your presidential election is just that process of changing the officer of the executive branch. And so then you have an agency individual who's actually rather high ranked saying we're going to prevent that change from occurring within the executive branch. So I think what may be necessary is if they could demonstrate that Strzok is not operating singly, but really on behalf of a larger group of individuals, it would further help if it could be shown that it's a foreign group of individuals. But that's what we may or may not get. But so what's probably will be needed to kind of push things to that stage.
And I'm proud to serve on this committee to uncover these lies that were perpetuated for far too long. With that, Mr. Chairman, with my remaining 30 seconds, I will yield to you.
The chairman yielding back. We'll wait for my time. We'll now recognize the gentlelady from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Durham, for being here this morning. The ranking member explored an item that I wanted to explore with you, which is based on the information provided to the U.S. government by Australia that a campaign aide had told one of their diplomats that the Russians had dirt on Clinton in the form of thousands of emails that, and this is a quote from your report, as an initial matter, there's no question the FBI had an affirmative obligation to closely examine the Australian information. So that's in your report. And I think the issue might be preliminary versus full, because you agree that there was an obligation to look at it.
This is a good rebuttal by Lofgren.
That's what you say.
Or you say based on that, some of the premises of the question are inaccurate. Papadopoulos did not tell.
No, the question is, do you disavow what you said in your report? That you had an affirmative obligation, the FBI, to look at that?
The answer to that question, but they had to look at it, yes.
All right. I want to take a look at some of the other things that I didn't find in your report. In looking at the FBI's behavior, did you find any evidence that the FBI was taking a look at the hacking of the Democratic National Committee and their investigation of that? And if so, where is that in your report?
That was outside the scope of what I was asked to do.
And in the Mueller report, he found that the campaign manager, Mr. Manafort, was giving inside information, private polling data to the Russians, that there was a meeting in Trump Tower with the president's son-in-law and his son, where the Russians had promised they had dirt, and the email from the president's son was something to the effect of, "So we love it." Did the FBI look at that? Did you examine that? And if so, where's that in your report?
That is not something I was asked to look at, and we didn't look at that.
I'm wondering, did you take a look at how the FBI evaluated the alleged ties to Alpha Bank? Did you hire cyber experts to actually take a look at those potential or alleged ties?
Yes. Well, I didn't hire them. They were FBI experts.
Okay.
And where's that in your report?
I can't, it's in there. I can find the page. My colleagues can find the page, but it is an entire section on Alpha Bank, the white papers and the data that were provided by Mr. Sussman to the FBI, and then the subsequent
No, but my question was, did you take a look, did you hire experts to evaluate the FBI's evaluation?
I did not hire experts to examine what the experts said, no.
Let me ask another question. I thought it was down a rabbit's hole, but you and Attorney General Barr went to Italy to take a look at some allegation about foreign servers, and Italian officials gave you evidence that they said linked Donald Trump to certain financial crimes. Did the Attorney General ask you to investigate that matter that the Italians referred to you? And if so, did you take any investigative steps, and Did you file charges, or if not, did you file a declination memo for decision not to charge in this case?
The question is outside the scope of what I think I'm authorized to talk about. It's not part of the report. I can tell you this, that investigative steps were taken, grand jury subpoenas were issued, and it came to nothing.
I'd like to yield the balance of my time to my colleague from California, Mr. Schiff.
Mr. Durham, DOJ policy provides
Shifty
that
Schiff.
you don't speak about a pending investigation, and yet you did, didn't you?
I'm not exactly sure what you're referring
When
to.
the Inspector General issued a report saying that the investigation was properly predicated, you spoke out in violation of Department of Justice policy to criticize the Inspector General's conclusions, didn't you?
I issued a public statement. I didn't do it anonymously. I didn't do it through third persons. There were...
Nonetheless, you violated department policy by issuing a statement while your investigation was ongoing, didn't you?
I don't know that. If I did, then I did, but I was not aware that I was violating some policy.
And you also sought to get the Inspector General to change his conclusion, did you not? When he was concluding that the investigation was properly predicated, did you privately seek to intervene to change that conclusion?
This is outside the scope of the report, but if you want to go there, we asked the Inspector General to take a look at the intelligence that's included in the classified appendix that you looked at, and said that that ought to affect portions of his report.
And you thought it was appropriate for you to intervene with an independent investigation by the Inspector General because he was reaching a conclusion you disagreed with. You thought that was appropriate.
That's not, the premise isn't right. The Inspector General circulated a draft memo to a number of agencies and persons. Our group was one of them. We were asked to review that draft and bring to his attention any concerns that we had or disagreements.
And when he refused
You
to...
got to be careful about these shifty premises. Adam Schiff's very good at that. Master manipulator.
When he refused to change his report, you violated
Mr. Chairman, I
policy.
insist on regular order.
Well, it's not even
I guess he wants to somehow jail John Durham. I don't know.
in his time, it's Ms. Lofgren's time, so the gentleman yields back to Ms. Lofgren, who's not here, so the time has expired. Mr. Durham, in the summer of 2016, did our government receive intelligence that suggested Secretary Clinton had approved a plan to tie President Trump to Russia?
Yes.
Was that intelligence important enough for Director Brennan to go brief the President of the United States, the Vice President of the United States, the Attorney General of the United States, and the Director of the FBI?
Yes.
And was that intelligence put then into a memorandum, a referral memorandum?
Yes.
And was that memorandum then given to Director Comey and Agent Strzok?
That's who it was addressed to, yes.
Did Director Comey share that memorandum with the FISA court?
I'm sorry, can you...
Did he share that memorandum with the FISA court? Did Director Comey do that?
I'm not aware of that if he did.
Did he share it with the lawyers preparing the FISA application?
Not to my knowledge.
Did he share it with the agents on the case, working the Crossfire Hurricane case?
No.
Didn't share it with the agents on the case. Can you tell the committee what happened when you took that referral memo and shared it with one of those agents, specifically Supervisory Special Agent Number 1?
We interviewed the first supervisor of the Crossfire investigation, the operational person. We showed him the intelligence information. He indicated he had never seen it before. He immediately became emotional, got up and left the room with his lawyer, spent some time in the hallway, came back.
He was ticked off, wasn't he?
Yes.
He was ticked off because this is something he should have had as an agent on the case. It's important information that the director of the FBI kept from the people doing the investigation.
The information was kept from him.
Who's Charles Dolan?
Charles Dolan is a public relations person here in Washington, D.C. He had prior involvement, professional involvement with Russian government, representing Russian government interests. He was a person that was associated with Igor Danchenko.
He was also buddies with the Clintons, wasn't he?
He had held positions when President Clinton was president.
In their campaign advisory to Secretary Clinton's presidential campaign, executive director of the Democrat Governors Association. That's the same Charles Dolan we're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah, and wasn't he also a key source for information in the dossier?
He provided some information that was included in the
Ritz-Carlton
dossier, yes.
stuff, the Manafort stuff. In the Crossfire Hurricane investigation and the Mueller investigation, when the FBI interviewed Mr. Dolan, what did he have to say?
To my knowledge, they didn't interview Mr. Dolan.
They didn't interview this guy? source for the dossier, key information in the dossier, buddies with the Clintons, and they didn't talk to him?
No, I mean, we report on that because even Christopher Steele in October 2016 identified Dolan as somebody that might have information.
I find it interesting they didn't talk to him. Were there agents on the case who wanted to talk to Mr. Dolan, Mr. Durham?
Yes.
What happened to analyst number one? She kept pushing to talk to Mr. Dolan. She was ultimately turned down. What happened to her the day that she was turned down and said, no, we're not talking to Dolan? What happened to her?
At about the same time, she was assigned to a different project.
They moved her. They said, we can't have this. We can't have that. We can't be looking into the Clintons' buddy, a key source for the dossier. They reassigned her. And then what did she do?
She was a key source of the dossier.
She memorialized it.
She entered a memo to the file because she said, at some point the Inspector General is going to want to know this information. I'm going to make sure it's recorded contemporaneously. She put it in the file. It's crazy. They didn't talk to the key source. They kept key intelligence from the investigators. This is how bad this investigation was. But here's the scary part. I don't think anything has changed. The day your report came out, 5 weeks ago, May 15th, you got a letter, Mr. Durham, addressed to you from the General Counsel at the FBI, Mr. Jason Jones, writes you this 6-page letter, and he says, not to worry, everything is fine. It's all been worked out at the FBI. He even says on page 2, he says, had the reforms implemented by current FBI leadership, summarized below, been in place in 2016, failures detailed in your report never would have happened, and he underlines it. He said this would never happen because of the reforms we implemented in 2019 and 2020. Then he says on page 4, one of the specific reforms, he says, FBI executive management has instructed investigations should be run out of the field and not from the headquarters. That statement is not true. 5 weeks ago, the FBI wrote you and said everything has changed when in fact it hasn't, and a statement in there is absolutely false, and we know it's false because 2 weeks ago today, we interviewed Stephen D'Antuono, former head of the Washington field office, Mr. Durham, and here's what he said in his transcript. Head of the Washington field office, when the Trump classified document investigation began, he said, that case was handled differently than I would have expected it to be, than any other cases handled. We learned a lot of stuff from Crossfire Hurricane, that headquarters should not work the investigation. It's supposed to be the field offices. My concern is that the Department of Justice was not following these principles. Nothing is, and that's the thing that scares me the most. Nothing has changed. Mr. Durham, I'm just finished with this. 60% of Americans now believe there's a double standard at the Justice Department. You know why they believe that? Because there is. That has got to change. And I don't think more training, more rules is going to do it. I think we have to fundamentally change the FISA process, and we have to use the appropriations process to limit how American tax dollars are spent at the Department of Justice. I yield back. Gentlelady from Texas is recognized, Ms. Jackson Wade.
Okay. Well, that was a pretty decent
You value the independence of the special counsel, do you not?
So I'm going to go to Democrat here.
In a letter to Attorney General Garland submitting your report, you asked him to allow you to continue investigation unencumbered. You said, we want to thank you and your office for permitting our inquiry to proceed independently without interference, as you assured the members of the Judiciary Committee would be the case during your confirmation hearings to become Attorney General of the United States. You value your special counsel status. So it is accurate that Attorney General Garland let you proceed on your case as you wish. Is that true?
That's true.
And yes or no, it was important to you that as a special counsel, your investigation was supposed to be independent. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Because special counsels and special attorneys are supposed to be independent, right?
Special counsels.
Yes, and independent. They're supposed to be independent. Is that correct?
Special counsel is independent of the Attorney General's office.
Thank you. Why is that the case in your view?
So there can be some confidence on the part of people looking at the investigation that was done, decisions which were made.
Thank you. Special counsels and special attorneys are supposed to be, for the American public, to present the potential of a conflict of interest between the government and a sensitive investigation. By appointing a special counsel and attorney general is supposed to be finding an unbiased party to do the investigating. This was at a very high level. This was dealing with potential presidential candidates. This was dealing with Russia collusion and undermining the very fabric of the United States of America. And they are supposed to leave that person alone, as you commended Attorney General Garland for doing. So, unlike Attorney General Garland, Attorney General Barr was very involved in your investigation, wasn't he?
He was not involved when I became special counsel. Prior to that, I worked under the supervision of the Attorney General and Deputy.
He was very involved, was he not? Let me just bring you to this point. Barr established early on that he was very interested in your investigation. On June 8, 2018, he sent then Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein an unsolicited memo arguing that the Mueller investigation should not be able to force the president to submit to interrogation about obstruction. In his text message sending the memo, Barr wrote that he feels very deeply about some of the issues taking shape in the Mueller matter. How often did you meet with Attorney General Barr in 2019?
Before I was special counsel, maybe, with him himself, maybe every 2 weeks, 3 weeks, something of that sort.
And then after?
Sometimes more frequently.
And then after?
After it became, I had been appointed special counsel, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that I saw him, but I didn't meet with him.
A lot.
This is a little concerning here. You have to think very subtly, like the serpent, because there are many serpents in D.C. in a swamp. So Barr was meeting with Durham every 2 weeks, and we know Barr's position on Trump. So I'm just sort of wondering if Durham picked up anything with all those interactions. What is Durham's current status with William Barr?
How often did you speak or text with the Attorney General? This is during the investigation.
I wouldn't. When I was special counsel or prior to that?
Special counsel, sir.
I don't know how many times I texted with him.
Right. Well, according to now public records, Barr scheduled at least 18 meetings or calls with you between 2019 March and October 2019, and you and he text messages with each other frequently, didn't you? Text messages.
Yeah, I was appointed as special counsel in October, so before that, yeah, there were probably any number of text messages. After that, I don't know.
Here are some examples. On August 31, 2019,
show like some kind of collusion between Barr and Durham. Okay, that's an interesting angle.
He sent you a message that said, John strongly suggests that you a lot of interesting things. On February 6, 2020, you text him, sir, just emerging from a skiff. Are you open to a call earlier this morning? On February 14, 2020, Barr texts you, call me when you get a chance. On March 19, 2020, Barr texts, can I call you later? And you responded, most certainly. On March 27, 2020, you sent him the best phone number for you all during the time of being special counsel. And here's an interesting one. On September 24, 2019, the day that the Speaker Pelosi announced a formal impeachment inquiry into President Trump, Attorney General Barr texts you, call me ASAP, and later that day you text back. Do you have a minute for a quick call, Durham? What was the purpose of this call, Mr. Durham? Were you discussing the impeachment inquiry?
I never had any conversation with Attorney General Barr about the impeachment inquiry.
Mr. Durham, this is an awful lot of direct interactions with the Attorney General for imposed, supposedly independent counsel prosecutor. During these messages that sound to you like appropriate interactions, do they sound like appropriate interactions between an Attorney General and a prosecutor investigating the administration?
Sure. Before I was appointed special counsel, I worked for the Attorney General of the United States. That's who
But you subsequently became special counsel. I know that.
Right.
You subsequently became. Not only did you interact with the Attorney General frequently, you also regularly engaged with one of his top deputies, Seth Ducharme. What was your relationship with Mr. Ducharme?
Seth Ducharme had been an assistant United States attorney in the Eastern District of New York. He works with one of my sons. We were friends.
Uh-oh.
And he, at the time, was working.
Son's friends. We haven't mentioned. We have a mention of John Durham Jr. That's interesting. And then we have this third party, Seth Ducharme. I'm not even sure how she's saying this guy's name. I may do some Google search to see if I can isolate this person.
Rather than having an independent investigation, there was a lot of interaction between the Attorney General and the special prosecutor, which shows that the Attorney General was actively directing your work.
The gentlelady yields back. I think this is amazing, Mr. Durham. You had 8 text messages with the Attorney General of the United States in 11 months time period. That's amazing. I can't believe that.
Mr. Chairman, parliamentary inquiry.
Yeah,
Whose time is that?
Yeah,
that
Jordan,
you
why are you doing
That
this?
was
It's a
that
waste.
was yield to Maryland,
Kind of
and
a
I
waste of
yielded back,
time.
I think.
That's a select
Mr. Chairman, that is
text. A lot more than that.
absolutely inappropriate.
I was just pointing out
I
something
think
that I
so,
think is
too.
so
Mr.
so
Chairman, that is
Look,
not
I'm not
appropriate.
even
We
a
will go
dim.
to Mr. Klein for 5 minutes. The gentleman from Virginia, excuse me. is
Look,
recognized.
if Sheila Jackson Lee
Thank
wants to
you.
waste someone's time, she has the right to do
Mr.
that.
Durham, your report is not just sobering, as you stated. It's outrageous and deeply troubling. Can you confirm these several main points that it found? The FBI did not have an adequate basis on which to launch Crossfire Hurricane, correct?
That's correct.
The FBI failed to examine all available exculpatory evidence, correct?
Correct.
FBI leadership continued the investigation even when case agents were unable to verify the evidence, correct?
That's correct.
The FBI did not interview key witnesses in Crossfire Hurricane, correct?
Correct.
And individuals within the FBI abused their authority under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, correct?
Correct.
The FBI immediately opened Crossfire Hurricane as a full counterintelligence investigation. What other options could the FBI have taken rather than immediately opening such an investigation?
Very good question. With a very good question.
Attorney General Edward Levy essentially created the guidelines in this area, these three divisions of assessments, preliminary, and then full, although they were different names at the time. That has evolved over time and become more particular. In this instance, the information that they had received from Papadopoulos about a suggestion of a suggestion, and not anything about emails, but just a suggestion of a suggestion, was sufficient and would have required the FBI to take a look at, well, what is this about? You open it as an assessment, and then you would analytically go try to collect intelligence that either supports or refutes or explains that information. That's the whole purpose of it. You assess it, and then you can move to a preliminary investigation. And if the evidence bears it out, then you go to a full investigation where you have all the tools available, including the most intrusive physical surveillance and electronic surveillance of U.S. citizens. Here, they just immediately went to open it as a full investigation without ever having talked to the Australians or gathered other evidence.
Right, so investigators relied on misstatements by the confidential human source, ignored exculpatory statements made by Papadopoulos in submitting the FISA application to surveil Carter Page, correct?
That's correct.
Is it true that an FBI employee fabricated this evidence? Can you expand on that fabrication and the reliance to support that?
So I'm just going to reiterate. I'm just going to reiterate what Durham said as far as how Crossfire Hurricane should have been opened up. So essentially, he was saying that there is a stage investigation. It's just called the assessment, and that's where determinations are made if it should be moved forward to the next stage. Then after the assessment, you go to a preliminary investigation, and then finally to a full investigation. In the actual situation, the Crossfire Hurricane opened as a full investigation, and you heard those points reiterated by the Democrats who were questioning Durham about Australia having some possible evidence that needed to be looked into. So Durham kept agreeing with them, but Durham's position is that it was already a full investigation before the U.S. even became aware of the evidence that Australia had. So that's key if that could be shown. Okay, we'll continue here.
One of the extensions, the final extension renewal of the FISA on Carter Page, one of the agents who had come on board wanted to be certain that there was information that was their information as to whether or not Carter Page had been a source of information to the CIA, and pressed Kevin Kleinsmith in the General Counsel's Office of the FBI on that point. Kleinsmith got a hold of people at another government agency, intelligence agency, on the issue, and that person said that yes, in FBI parlance, Carter Page was a source, and put that in writing. When Kleinsmith talked to the agent who was saying, we want to be sure on this, was he or was he not a source? Kleinsmith said, no, he said he's not. He said, did we get that in writing? Kleinsmith said yes, and they said, well, I want to see it. And then Kleinsmith altered the other government agency document to reflect this, to say that Page was not a source, when he in fact was a source. That's the gist of it.
What did the investigators mean when they said they hoped the returns on the Carter Page FISA application would, quote, self-corroborate?
That is another troublesome thing. The agent was, they're saying, well, if we can get on surveillance, electronic surveillance of Page, then we'll find out essentially whether we really do have probable cause or not. He would self-corroborate in that sense.
Are investigators supposed to corroborate information before or after it's included in a FISA application?
Yeah, you have to have that before you intrude in the liberties of American citizens.
In fact, the FBI is required to follow its Woods procedures, which the FBI adopted to ensure the accuracy of the information contained in FISA applications, correct?
That's correct.
And did the FISC ever criticize the FBI's handling of the Page FISA application?
Yes.
And what were some of those concerns that they raised?
Well, ultimately, the FISC issued an order, a memorandum indicating that had the information that was disclosed in the investigation done by Inspector General Horowitz, a very thorough job and a good job and a well-written report. Had they known that, at least the second and third renewal applications would not have established probable cause. And I think the Bureau, the Department of Justice acknowledges that as well. If the FISC had all of the information that I think is included in this report, I think it's highly doubtful that there would have ever been an application submitted, and if it was submitted, that the FISC would have ever granted that order.
Thank you. I yield back.
Yields back. The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Durham, you were appointed by whom? Who recommended you and appointed you?
As the special counsel?
No, as the U.S. Attorney.
As U.S. Attorney. It was President Trump at the time, with 2 Democratic senators from Connecticut supporting the nomination.
Mr. Trump appointed you. You believe Mr. Trump has pretty good judgment on people, their abilities, and their character?
I'm not going to
guess not.
Mr. Trump or my thoughts about Mr. Trump.
Mr. Barr appointed you special counsel, is that correct?
That's correct.
Mr. Trump has called Mr. Barr a gutless pig, a coward, and a rhino.
Yeah.
Which of those is correct? Which isn't?
Oh, boy.
In my experience, none of those are correct.
Oh,
Mr.
that's
Trump
key.
isn't that good of a...
That's key. I guess he's kind of in a situation where he can't really throw Barr under the bus in public because it'll create a lot of headlines and negative publicity towards himself. But on the other hand, you can look at it as like a possible alliance between himself and Barr, like a tie that may go, unfortunately, a bit deeper. And if that's the case, that kind of explains the outcome. I think Matt Gaetz, he kind of like, he grasps this suspicion and he really kind of, takes it.
Expert on character and judging people. In your opinion, he isn't, because he's none of those. He's not a gutless pig, but Trump says he is.
Yeah. That's outside the scope of my report.
Also outside the scope of your report, apparently. Also outside of the scope of your report was apparently the meeting at Trump Tower between the Russians and the Trump boys, where they talked about allegedly adoptions, but we know it was really about sanctions. How was that outside of your report?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't quite follow that.
Meeting at the Trump Tower, Russian attorney came to Trump, and Donald Trump Jr. was just wonderful, wonderful. We love it, we love it. Russian decisions to interact with the Trump campaign and influence the actions of the campaign, allegedly for adoption law, but really for sanctions relief. The FBI came up with that, did they not?
A meeting took place at Trump Towers on June 9th. The lure, as I understand it, was that there was derogatory information on Clinton that was going to be provided. They met, and as I believe in a HPSI report, the HPSI report fully laid that out, that the discussion then at Trump Towers was about adoption, not about anything relating to Mrs. Clinton.
It was totally about sanctions. You're trying to get rid of the Magnitsky Law. Adoptions is a ruse. Should you not have looked into that and seen what the Russians were wanting in return for that? Because that's the biggest thing Putin wanted at the time, was to get Trump to relieve his people of Magnitsky sanctions.
Magnitsky sanctions.
Director Mueller investigated that, and I believe one of your House committees explored that. That was outside the scope of what we were looking at.
And it was outside the scope of your authority to look at Klimnik and Manafort meeting and exchanging polling data?
Was that out? I'm sorry, I'm not following your question.
Manafort. You remember Manafort, the crook that managed the campaign for nothing but got tons of money from different Russian
Oh, you're
people
not
over the
biased.
years that y'all pardoned. Mr. Barr later got something with
it's like getting
commutation or
upset.
pardon. I think a pardon. Manafort.
I know who Ms. Manafort is.
Yeah, he met with Kalimnik, and they discussed polling data. You don't know about that?
No, that Mr. Klimnik met with a lot of people, including people.
He
from
met
the
with
State
Manafort
Department.
and discussed polling data. Do you not know about that?
I'm aware of that.
All right.
Wow.
Why did you then not think
What's
it was a
wrong
good
with this
idea
guy?
for you to look into it and see if the FBI wasn't correct?
Take a chill pill.
That there was
Cohen. Take a chill pill.
collusion, a connection between Russia and the Trump campaign to elect Trump.
My assignment was to look at the conduct of the intelligence community agencies, not to conduct some separate investigation that was done by the House or that's done by the Senate or was done by Director Mueller.
You don't think that if the intelligence communities, the FBI, others came up with this information and did good work, that should be part of your balanced report?
I'm not following your question. I apologize.
Well,
If it's a
I've tried
question-
to follow your report. Mr. Donald Trump Jr. would have called it a nothing burger. You got no convictions. You got nothing. It was all set up to hurt the Mueller report, which was correct and was redacted, to hurt the Bidens, and to help Trump. And you were a part of it. You have a
Is it
good
spiritual?
reputation. You had a good reputation. That's why the two Democrats supported you. But the longer you hold on to Mr. Barr and this report that Mr. Barr gave you
I'm
as
not saying it
special
really means
counsel,
anything, but
your
this is a
reputation
spiritual
will be
battle.
damaged.
It seems like
As
we're in right
everybody's
now.
reputation who gets involved with Donald Trump is damaged. He's
Could mean
damaged
something.
goods. There's no
Could
good
not.
dealing with him because you will end up on the bottom of a pyre. I yield back the balance of my time.
Sure.
Can we presume the gentleman's undecided on how he feels about the former president?
Fruit from the poison well.
Gentlemen, witness can respond.
Yeah, my concern about my reputation is with the people who I respect, and my family and my Lord. And I'm
Oh,
perfectly
he's a man of
comfortable
God.
with my reputation with them, sir.
Well said. God bless you. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Fitzgerald.
Mr. Durham, thank you for being here today. On October 3rd, 2016, the FBI met with Christopher Steele, who confessed to relying heavily on a Russian national living in Washington, D.C. as a subsource. That subsource was later identified
This
as
actually means
Igor
something.
Danchenko. Steele not only used
Fortunately, in this
Danchenko to
atheistic time period, it is somewhat of a big deal to actually be a Christian. Okay, so let's keep going.
create the dossier, but according to your report, Steele was unable to corroborate any of the substantive allegations made in the dossier. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Even after the FBI offered Steele $1 million if somehow he could actually follow through and underscore some of those specific items. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So the FBI interviewed Danchenko and Steele's subsource, the Steele subsource, for 3 days, from January 24th through January 26th of 17. However, according to your report, Danchenko could not provide any evidence corroborating allegations contained in the dossier. Is that correct?
That's a fact.
And yet the FBI paid Danchenko $220,000 during his time as a confidential human source. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And did the FBI propose making continued future payments to Danchenko totaling more than $300,000?
That's correct.
Danchenko becomes a confidential human source, then enlists his own subsource, Charles Dolan, as was brought up earlier, who was a Democrat operative and had previously served as an advisor to Hillary Clinton's 2008 presidential campaign. Is that your understanding? Is that correct?
That's correct.
Did Danchenko ever disclose his relationship with Charles Dolan to the FBI that you're aware of?
He did not during the interviews that were conducted in January. Subsequently, he was specifically asked in an interview with his then handler, do you know Charles Dolan? If you listen to the recording, he hesitates for some awkward period of time and says, yes, I know who Dolan is. So he acknowledged knowing Mr. Dolan.
Do you think it had anything to do with he was simply worried that disclosing a Democrat operative as a subsource might jeopardize the whole payroll deal that the FBI had set up with them?
Gotta do this.
And we lay these facts out as we do other facts in the report, and leave it to others to draw the reasonable conclusions or inferences from those facts.
So 2413. Let me just go back a little bit here. Let's go
In an
23,
interview
27.
with his then handler, do you know Charles Dolan? If you listen to the recording, he hesitates for some awkward period of time and then says, yes, I know who Dolan is. So he acknowledged knowing Mr. Dolan.
Do you think it had anything to do with he was simply worried that disclosing a Democrat operative as a subsource might jeopardize the whole payroll deal that the FBI had set up with them?
And we lay these facts out as we do other facts in the report, and leave it to others to draw the reasonable conclusions or inferences from those facts.
Very good. Of the hundreds of individuals who the FBI interviewed through the course of Crossfire Hurricane and Miller's special counsel investigation, this came up earlier, was Charles Dolan ever interviewed by the FBI?
He was not.
Do you have any insight as to why the FBI would not interview him or overlook such a high-profile person in this whole investigation?
That's something of a mystery. Going back to October 3rd, according to the ALAT, the Assistant Legal Attaché for the Bureau, when he first, going back to July 5th, when he first met with Steele, Steele had indicated to him at the time that HC was aware of what Steele was doing. When the Bureau went back to interview Steele on October 3rd about matters relating to Crossfire Hurricane, Steele, in fact, had provided the Bureau with Dolan's name as somebody who might have information relating to Trump, but he was never interviewed. So yeah, I don't know why they never interviewed Trump. I'm sorry, why they didn't interview Mr. Dolan, but they didn't. The explanation that was given to the intelligence analyst who's referred to in the report essentially was that that would be outside the scope of their mission, outside their role.
Very good. You note in your report on page 168 that one of the analysts of the Miller team was told, quote, to cease all research and analysis related to Dolan.
I just briefly look at this. I just took a clipping from a New York Post article. This is a New York Post article dated November 5th, 2021. Longtime Clinton crony takes center stage in latest Durham indictment. And so we have this here. Dolan was Danchenko's primary source for a section of the dossier that analyzed Paul Manafort's resignation as Trump's campaign chairman in August 2016. A graduate at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, a liberal institution, Dolan cut his teeth on a rough-and-tumble world by Bay State Democratic politics before moving to Washington to work in Capitol Hill as legislative director. In 1983, he was named as the funding executive director of the Democrat Governors Association, so extremely political position. After leaving that association, Dolan was a member of Bill Clinton's Presidential Exploratory Committee, then served as Virginia State Chairman for the Clinton-Gore campaign in both 1992 and 1996. On both occasions, Clinton won the election but lost the Commonwealth. After winning his second term, Clinton appointed Dolan to 2 4-year terms as vice chairman of the State Department's Advisory Commission on Public Diplomacy. Dolan returned to the Democratic campaign trail in 2004, serving as a senior communications consultant for John Kerry's unsuccessful White House bid. 4 years later, he advised Hillary Clinton in Iowa and New Hampshire during her unsuccessful campaign for a Democrat nomination. So he's very deeply entrenched in Democrat politics, and apparently it was the subsource. So there we go.
Unquote. This was the same analyst who, according to your footnote, prepared a timeline in the event she were later interviewed about her role on the Miller special counsel investigation. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Igor Danchenko had also relied on other subsources, namely Olga Galkina and Sergei Milin. When the FBI interviewed those two subsources, were either of them able to verify the information in the Steele dossier?
Well, speaking first to Milian, we interviewed Milian as well. He's outside the country. He claims to fear for his safety and whatnot, but he adamantly denied ever talking to Danchenko or providing any information akin to what was in the Steele reporting. In fact, he was a supporter of President Trump, which made it seem highly unlikely that he would be providing derogatory information to somebody he had never met or spoken to. So that's as to Milian. With respect to Ms. Galkina, Ms. Galkina was somebody who provided some information to Danchenko, provided some information to Dolan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm out of time.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Special Counsel Durham, in March of 2019, before releasing the Mueller report to the public, Attorney General Barr released a statement mischaracterizing its findings and conclusions. And shortly thereafter, Attorney General Barr announced that he was investigating the FBI for investigating Putin's interference in the 2016 presidential election. And then in April or May of 2019, Attorney General Barr appointed you to lead that investigation. Isn't that correct?
He did appoint me to lead the investigation, yes, sir.
And then in October of 2020, Attorney General Barr appointed you as an independent special counsel so that you could continue investigating the origins of the Russia investigation once Trump was out of office, correct?
I was appointed special counsel in October, yes.
And by that time, your investigation had already cost the American taxpayers over $6.5 million. Isn't that correct?
At that point, probably not, no.
Well, at this point, how much has it cost?
As I understand the figure, having looked at it, it's around $6.5 million.
And after 3.5 years of investigation and $6.5 million of taxpayer money spent, your investigation led to the indictment of only 3 individuals, correct?
That's correct. Well, it was
contrary to the fervent prayers of some on this panel, former FBI Director Jim Comey and former CIA Director John Brennan were not among those 3 who were indicted. Isn't that correct?
Oh, he has to step on the 17 people.
Of some on this panel, your investigation failed to produce indictments against Hillary Clinton, correct?
That's correct.
Didn't indict Barack Obama.
That's correct.
Didn't indict Joe Biden.
That's correct.
Couldn't even indict Hunter Biden.
We didn't investigate Mr. Hunter Biden.
And of your 3 prosecutions, one ended with a guilty plea to an unrelated to the origins of the FBI investigation, and that individual received a probated sentence with no jail time, correct?
Parts of that are correct.
And the other 2 men you prosecuted went
Johnson's
to trial
point is your investigation was unsuccessful.
Charges, charging, they were accused of lying to the FBI, and both were slam dunk acquitted. Isn't that correct?
They were acquitted.
And none of the individuals you prosecuted were ever charged with being part of a hoax or a fraud or a witch hunt or a politically motivated deep state conspiracy against Donald Trump. Isn't that correct?
I would not say that that's accurate.
You mean you did charge somebody with being a part of a hoax?
We charged Mr. Sussman with having knowingly provided false information to the FBI regarding Alpha Bank.
But he was acquitted though, right?
Well, that wasn't your question.
Mr. Sussman was acquitted after you charged him, correct?
Grand jury found
he was found innocent.
It just shows you that Durham, at least if anything, is a logical thinker. He's not falling into traps set by Johnson.
By a unanimous jury of 12.
That's not true.
Well,
what's true is the grand jury found probable cause to indict Mr. Sussman.
A jury of his peers acquitted him, though, correct?
and a trial jury...
You're not going to disagree on that, are you, Mr. Durham?
I'm going to try to answer.
It's a bit of like a... I'm not sure what this tactic is. It's like a gaslight, or I don't know. But just keep going.
Your question is...
Well, let me ask you this, because in your report, you related or alluded to allegations of misconduct against Mr. Sussman and Mr. Danchenko as if those allegations had been proven true at trial, when in fact both those individuals had been acquitted and your allegations disproven. Do you believe that it's ethical to state something as a fact in an official government report when the court system found that you could not prove those allegations?
Well, I think if you read the report, you'd see that we talked about the results of the trial, and we included all of the evidence that we had available, unfortunately not all of which was admitted at trial.
Well, let me ask you this, Mr. Durham. You closed your investigation after you failed to find that the FBI investigation into Putin's interference in the 2016 election was politically motivated and was a deep state conspiracy against ex-President Trump. You were unable to prove that that was true.
That is not what I was investigating.
Well, but you did not find that that was true, correct?
I mean, it's not what he was investigating, so he didn't list that as a finding. I guess you can ask his personal opinion.
You found it to be false, as a matter of fact.
You've had
Isn't that correct?
You have a chance to read the report.
Well, I did.
Mr. Chairman, the time has expired. Could the gentleman be allowed to answer the question?
Gentleman can respond. Time the gentleman from Georgia has expired. The witness can respond.
Just saying, if you read the report, we lay the facts out in the report as to these matters. I'm not here to talk about Mr. Trump. I'm not here to talk about deep state or whatever other characterizations you made. This report is...
He's not here to talk about deep state. You pretty much clipped that one.
It's factual. Nobody's raised any issues as to whether it's factually inaccurate in any way. People can draw their own conclusions based on those facts.
Yep.
So it's timestamp on
You've been
that.
at it an hour and a
So we're
half.
like 1:32:50 something.
Just let us know if and when you.
Yeah, I'm fine. Whatever
okay,
the
great.
committee wants.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Issa.
Mr. Durham, each of us on the panel has a different background and a different idea of what's best to get out of this report and the work that you have done so faithfully, not just for the last 4 years, but for your entire career. So I'm going to start off by asking, is it true that you have the Attorney General's Exceptional Service Award, a decoration for your service?
That's true.
Is it also true that you have the Attorney General's Distinguished Service Award?
That's true.
And who awarded you that?
You know, it goes back in time. Attorney General Reno had...
No, 2012.
Oh, I'm sorry, in 2012. I'm trying to remember what award it was. I don't frankly recall. I don't really
just for the record, it's Eric Holder.
Yeah. That was the CIA investigation. That's right. It's Attorney General Holder. Correct.
It was, and you had to deal with some of the most despicable people and do the things that we do sometimes when wrong has been done. So I want to thank you for that. It seems like for your entire career, you've been a go-to for difficult situations. Not necessarily the standard I'm trying to rise quickly award, but in fact, you're a career investigator. And I would imagine pretty closely that you've got your 82% overall. But I want to talk about something that I'm not qualified to talk about, but I can ask you. Are there what you would call unindicted co-conspirators in this? In other words, are there people at all levels who did things wrong, who were not charged with crimes because of the limitation of the ability to bring charges against them for what they did, even if it was wrong?
We brought charges where we thought in good faith that we could prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt. Is there evidence beyond that? Of course.
Sure. So in your experience as a career prosecutor, when people break the rules and it changes the outcome of something, like launching an investigation without a predicate, like the president, the vice president, the attorney general, and a host of others, FBI director, knowing that this had been started with a false predicate, knowing that Hillary Clinton's campaign, with her approval, in fact, had authorized this not op research, but this weaponizing of a false claim, when they did that, they in fact changed the outcome, whether criminal or not, of many things, including certainly some things in voters' minds. Isn't that correct?
I mean, generally speaking, there are lots of bad things that people do that aren't crimes. We can only charge those that aren't crimes.
And I appreciate that. So when people are constantly making this point that somehow you didn't put enough people in jail, you gave us 300 pages that give us a responsibility. And as I said, I'm not going to try to pretend that I'm the smart lawyer up here at all, or even a lawyer. But I am somebody that understands organization, oversight, and transparency. In your report, you do note the changes made and so on, but unless we make changes in transparency to outside individuals who can be counted on to be ombudsmen to the process, isn't it true that if the president, the vice president, the attorney general, and a host of other top people at the FBI and Department of Justice choose in the future to push to make outcomes occur that would not occur according to their own printed rules, that no rule per se is going to change that?
I think that's true. As we say in the report, ultimately what this comes down to is the integrity of the people who are doing the job. Are they adhering to their oath, or are they not adhering to their oath? Are they following the law? Are they not following the law?
Well, in my 20 plus years on this side of the dais, what I've found is that people, when the light of day is shed on them, follow the rules much better than they aren't. So for all of us up here, I want to thank you for your contributions and your service. Hopefully, I know you're gone into retirement, but hopefully in the future, as we begin looking at reforms that can be counted on and believed by the American people, at reforms that create better transparency, at reforms that do not allow FISA judges to be misled by people with an agenda, that you'll be available to at least give us some of the guidance from your decades of knowing how it's done right at the Department of Justice. And Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for your indulgence in so many people. I will not take excess time. I believe this witness's 300 plus pages speaks extremely well for itself, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Durham, just so people remember what this is all about, let me ask you, the Mueller investigation revealed that Russia interfered in the 2016 election in sweeping and systemic fashion, correct?
That's correct.
And Russia did so through a social media campaign that favored Donald Trump and disparaged Hillary Clinton, correct?
As the report says, yes.
And Mueller found that a Russian intelligence service hacked computers associated with the Clinton campaign and then released the stolen documents publicly. Is that right?
That report speaks for itself as well.
Mueller also reported that though he could not establish the crime of conspiracy beyond a reasonable doubt, he also said, quote, a statement that the investigation did not establish certain facts does not mean there was no evidence of those facts. That also appears in the report, doesn't it?
There's language to that effect, yes.
In fact, you cited that very statement in your own report, did you not? As a way of distinguishing between proof beyond a reasonable doubt and evidence that falls short of proof beyond a reasonable doubt.
Correct.
As an illustration of this, both Mueller and congressional investigations found that Trump's campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, was secretly meeting with an operative linked to Russian intelligence named Konstantin Kilimnik, correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
And that Manafort, while chairman of the Trump campaign, gave that Russian intelligence operative the campaign's internal polling data, correct?
That's what I've read in the news, yes.
And that Manafort provided this information to Russian intelligence while Russian intelligence was engaged in that social media campaign and the release of stolen documents to help the Trump campaign, correct?
You may be getting beyond depth of my knowledge, but
well, let me say very simply, while Manafort, the campaign chairman for Donald Trump, was giving this Russian intelligence officer internal campaign polling data, Russian intelligence was helping the Trump campaign, weren't they?
I don't know that.
You really don't know those very basic facts of the investigation?
I know the general facts, yes. Do I know that particular fact myself? No. I mean, I know that I've read that in the media.
And are you aware, Mr. Durham, that Mueller and congressional investigations also revealed that Don Jr. was informed that a Russian official was offering the Trump campaign, quote, very high level and sensitive information, unquote, that would be incriminating of Hillary Clinton and was part of, quote, Russia and its government support of Mr. Trump? Are you aware of that?
Sure, people get phone calls all the time from individuals who claim to have information like that.
Really, the son of a presidential candidate gets calls all the time from a foreign government offering dirt on their opponent? Is that what you're saying?
I don't think this is unique in your experience.
So you have other instances of the Russian government offering dirt on a presidential candidate to the presidential candidate's son. Is that what you're saying?
Would you repeat the question?
You said that it's not uncommon to get offers of help from a hostile foreign government in a presidential campaign directed at the president's son. You really stand by that, Mr. Durham?
I'm saying that people can make phone calls making claims all the time that you may have experienced.
Are you really trying to diminish the significance of what happened here and the secret meeting that the president's son set up in Trump Tower to receive that incriminating information? Are you trying to diminish the significance of that, Mr. Durham?
I'm not trying to diminish it at all, but I think the more complete story is that they met and it was a ruse and they didn't talk about Mrs. Clinton.
And you think it's insignificant that he had a secret meeting with a Russian delegation for the purpose of getting dirt on Hillary Clinton, and the only disappointment expressed in that meeting was that the dirt they got wasn't better. You don't think that's significant?
I don't think that that was a well-advised thing to do.
Not well-advised.
Right.
Wow, that's the understatement of the year. So you think it's perfectly appropriate or maybe just ill-advised for a presidential campaign to secretly meet with a Russian delegation to get dirt on their opponent? You would merely say that's inadvisable?
Yeah, if you're asking me would I do it, I hope I wouldn't do it, but it was not illegal. It was stupid, foolish, ill-advised.
Well, it is illegal to conspire to get incriminating opposition research from a hostile government that is of financial value to a campaign. Wouldn't that violate campaign laws?
I don't know all those
the
facts
problem,
to be true.
yeah, that's it. That's the problem. Is are the facts true? The premise is the most important thing, and Shifty's very, very good at trying to get you to agree with his premise, and then just he carries you along his way to some other faulty conclusion based on a faulty premise.
Report, Mr. Durham, doesn't dispute anything Mueller found, did it?
No, our object, our aim was not to dispute Director Mueller. I have the greatest regard, highest regard for Director Mueller. He's a patriot.
The only distinguishment between his investigation and yours is he refused to bring charges where he couldn't prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, and you did. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Durham, I want to, as a fellow alum of DOJ, I want to thank you for your service, number one. And number two, welcome you to Congress.
It's a real pleasure to be here.
This is really funny to me. I mean, it is great to have some chummy and lighten the mood, but
FISA and
gotta get through this here.
Your most recent experience as the special counsel and
you don't want to make too much of an appearance of bias.
I guess I am concerned with the conclusions in your report, and I just want to. They've been mentioned several times here, but. In your opening statement, you talk about lack of investigative discipline, a failure to take logical investigative steps, and bias. It appears to me that the lack of investigative discipline and the failure to take logical investigative steps are a result of bias. Is that fair?
I think that's fair. When you look at what is involved here, this is a presidential campaign. It's not a run-of-the-mill investigation. This is so highly sensitive. It could affect the outcome of a presidential election and the future of the nation. You would expect that the discipline that would have been followed would have been higher than ever. And that didn't happen here. There was sort of analytical rigor, the discipline and how we investigate criminal matters, that was just absent here in large measure.
Fair to say that there was a rush to judgment?
I'm sorry?
Fair to say that there was a rush to judgment? In other words, the judgment of proceeding with the investigation before following proper procedure?
As been alluded to here, the information that they had received from the Australian diplomats, not Australian intelligence or law enforcement, about Australian diplomats about something that was said at a bar. Within 3 days of that information having been received at FBI headquarters, the deputy director of the FBI, according to Mr. Strzok, told him to immediately open that, and it was opened as a full investigation on a weekend with Mr. Strzok, not only writing the opening electronic communication.
This appears to be a contradiction to something you said earlier. But this is also an opportunity to learn the linear, granular details of how this all developed. So essentially, Durham's now saying that it was within 3 days of hearing a rumor from a bar in Australia that the full investigation was launched instead of the assessment phase. I think before he said that that wasn't the case, and I had typed that up earlier.
Memo, but approving that memo as well.
And this is the same Mr. Strzok who we saw the text message from that had a clear bias regarding President Trump.
It's the same person, yes.
And how long did Director Comey serve in the FBI before he became director? And I'm not saying Department of Justice, I'm saying FBI.
Right. To my knowledge, he was not in the FBI prior to becoming director.
And he promoted the people, Andy McCabe, Peter Strzok, others, to the position in headquarters and then dealt with them there. Is that fair?
He would have certainly had a role in the advancement of people in the upper management of the FBI, yes.
My concern is that the bias that has been demonstrated there, whether it has been eradicated or dealt with, could exist in any of these agencies. And these agencies have access to very sensitive information that we and Congress allow for counterterrorism, counterintelligence activities, and it really goes around the Constitution because it does not deal with U.S. citizens. And I'm talking about the FISA rules now. Have you heard of backdoor searches?
I've heard the term, yes, sir.
And it refers to the ability of an agency to look at a U.S. citizen's communications because the communication was with a foreign individual and it was recorded because that foreign individual was being looked at. Is that fair?
That's fair.
And if there was this bias in an agency like the FBI that we saw previously, and they wanted to go after a U.S. citizen, they could use that technique to go after that citizen. And my question to you is, how do we prevent that? How do we in Congress take a look at FISA, try to maintain the national security interests, but at the same time protect U.S. citizens from a rogue agency, a biased agency or agent, I shouldn't say agency and condemn everyone, but individuals in the agency? How do we protect American citizens from what could occur? And let me give you another quick example. Going out and buying information from private data sellers to obtain information that you couldn't obtain with a search warrant because you don't have probable cause. Those techniques are all available under FISA. What should we do?
You know, that's clearly beyond my my background and experience. These are very complicated questions, particularly when we know the adversaries are doing the same thing. And you know, what do we do under those circumstances? I think you've got a very tough job in figuring out how do you balance the liberties of the American people, and protect the liberties of the American people, while at the same time protecting the country and the nation and the people of the United States. I don't feel qualified really to provide you with any helpful information along those lines, but I know that it is a serious issue. It's a serious concern.
I thank you and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Before going to the gentleman from California, the gentlelady from Texas has a unanimous consent, I think? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to submit records from the Department of Justice reflecting meetings with the U.S. Attorney John Durham. These records were in response to American Oversight's request for DOJ communications between the offices of the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General and the Durham or his first assistant. I ask unanimous consent to place this in the record of this hearing.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous consent.
Gentleman from
request.
California.
Mr. Chairman, you and your colleagues have continually cited to Steve DeUnio's transcribed interviews using selected statements taken out of context. I move for unanimous consent to enter the entire transcript into the record so the American public can see for itself exactly what he said.
Yeah, we will work on that. Yeah, we'll work on that. We don't want to, we'll talk with the chairman. We want to make that fully available.
Mr. Chairman,
The
you're
ranking member.
objecting to a unanimous consent request and to something.
Mr. Chairman, I object.
Okay.
So if I understand correctly, Mr. Chairman, you're happy to cite selected portions of the transcript out of context, but you're not happy to see...
Mr. Chairman, there's an objection. Is there further action?
You don't want the American public to see this, Mr. Issa?
Roll call vote, please.
Roll call vote.
Yeah.
There's no vote on that.
I just want to clarify for the gentleman. We want to put the transcript out. There's a couple. We got a little work to do on certain names that have to be redacted for obvious reasons. But yeah, we definitely want to put the transcript out. We'll work with the minority to make sure that happens. I thought it was an amazing interview by Mr. D'Antuono, the former head of the Washington field office. We want that information out to the public, and we'll make sure it happens.
Can I suggest, Mr. Chairman, that you grant the request subject to redactions to protect personally private information?
So, without objection, so ordered.
Thank you very much.
Gentleman from California is
And you have accepted my submission. I didn't
did
hear.
that right away.
Thank you.
Away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Durham, many of my MAGA colleagues want you to be someone who you are not and to say something that you clearly won't. And so I want to just start by thanking you for your many years of service to our country as a federal prosecutor. I want to talk a little bit more about the independence of a special counsel and just clarify, you did send multiple texts to the Attorney General after you were appointed as special counsel. Did you ever text message with Attorney General Garland once he took over as Attorney General?
No, Attorney General Garland had me communicate through the principal Deputy Attorney General, Mr. Weinsheimer.
Did you ever travel overseas with Attorney General Garland?
No.
And
I met with the Attorney General, but I didn't travel overseas with him.
And President Biden, through the Attorney General, could have had you removed, fired, is that right?
I'm sure he could have.
And you stayed on?
I completed my term as special counsel.
Was there anyone you wanted to indict that you were prohibited from indicting by Attorney General Garland?
No.
So if you wanted to, you could have indicted Hillary Clinton, but you never asked, is that right?
If I had the evidence, yeah, he could have, for sure.
If you wanted to indict President Biden, you could have asked, right?
Yeah, that was not part of our mission. We weren't really looking at that, but...
If you could have indicted Director Comey, you could have asked.
So he's going through the same thing that Johnson went through.
And you didn't?
Brennan could have been indicted, Comey could have been indicted, Clinton could have been indicted.
Attorney General Garland had never asked me not to indict somebody.
Great. So I just want to make it clear to my colleagues, you had all the power in the world to indict anyone that you had evidence to indict, and you were never blocked from doing it. That's correct?
That's correct.
I also want to compare you to the last major special counsel investigation that we had. You agree Special Counsel Mueller charged dozens of individuals and you indicted 3, is that correct?
Indicted 2 and a third pleaded guilty.
Right. And Special Counsel Mueller had dozens of convictions, some at trial, but no defendant was outright acquitted. Is that right in the Mueller investigation? Outright acquitted. Across the board, every charge acquitted.
Right, I don't believe there are any acquittals. I'm not sure there were dozens of convictions. There were more than a dozen people who were indicted.
You were wise earlier to not weigh in on Donald Trump's character. You are under oath, after all. But did anything in your report prove false that Russians met with Trump's family during the campaign at Trump Tower after an offer of dirt on Hillary Clinton? Anything prove that that meeting didn't happen?
I don't have any evidence that that did not happen.
Anything in your report prove false that in the 2016 campaign, Donald Trump tried and concealed from the public a real estate deal he was seeking in Moscow?
I don't know anything about that. There's nothing in the report about it. It's not something we investigated.
Anything in your report prove false that Donald Trump publicly asked Russia to hack Hillary's emails and then hours later they did?
If you're referring to...
Did Donald Trump not say at a press conference, Russia, if you're listening, you should get Hillary's emails? Did you prove that he didn't say that?
Yeah, no, we didn't. Okay. We didn't investigate.
Did you prove false in the 2016 campaign that Trump's campaign manager gave polling data to a spy for a Russian intelligence service?
We didn't investigate that.
Anything in your report say that Donald Trump in 2016 acted the way that Americans would want a presidential candidate to act with regard to Russia?
I'm sorry, could you repeat
Are
that?
you signing off on the way Donald Trump acted with Russia in 2016?
Our report doesn't address that.
And you agree that Russia interfered in the 2016 election?
I agree that there's substantial evidence to show that.
Thank you. Mr. Durham, my MAGA colleagues want you to be someone you're not, and they want you to say something you won't. They want you to join the law firm of Insurrection LLC, which incidentally and probably appropriately is chaired by a guy who never passed the bar exam, and you're wise not to do that. You see, my colleagues today, they are making themselves footnotes and foot soldiers in the history books that will chronicle Donald Trump's corruption. And I yield my remaining time to Mr. Schiff.
Well, Swalwell is an interesting world.
Mr. Durham, returning to your decision to speak out during the pendency of your investigation, did you have staff on your team advise you against making statements during the pendency of your investigation?
They didn't advise me either way, no.
Did any of your staff raise ethical concerns about your speaking out either in an interim report or after the Inspector General investigation? Any of your staff raise ethical concerns with your doing so?
Not that I recall, no. Raise a technical concern? No, not that I'm aware of.
Did they raise concerns with your speaking out during the pendency of the investigation?
Time of the gentleman has expired. The witness can respond.
I'm sorry.
Did any of your staff raise concerns about your speaking out during the pendency of your investigation in contrast to DOJ policy?
Not that I recall.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Florida is recognized.
Good morning,
Now
Mr.
look at
Durham.
Schiff's eyes, man. It's just
I
evil.
don't want to lay any blame.
There's a lot of anger
I
there.
made that decision to make a statement. They were not involved in it. Right, Nora Danahy.
Gentlelady from Florida.
Right. Nora Danahy, a friend of mine, a very good lawyer.
It's really interesting. He's giving this additional exposition.
Why did she resign?
That's Nora Danahy. That's why we brought her on.
Why did she resign?
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman
Answer the question if you'd like.
Mr. Chairman, who's in charge here? Because it's not Mr. Schiff, I don't think.
It's the lady's time from Florida.
Good morning, Mr. Durham.
Good morning.
As a former
That's an
federal
interesting
prosecutor,
point.
I want
It's
to begin
just
by
like,
telling you how much I appreciate
157,
your work, that
right,
of your team, and your
you probably
presence
said
here today. And
157.
you may begin by answering the prior question if you wish.
With respect to Ms. Danahy, I have the greatest respect for her. She's a friend of mine. She's very well educated. She's an honest person. We had some disagreements on issues, and I don't really have any comment beyond that. I'm not going to discuss the internal management and decision-making. I'll tell you this, that every agent and every lawyer who worked on this project had a full voice in the decisions that were going forward. I made the final decisions.
Thank you, Mr. Durham. I'd like to focus on the Department of Justice's procedures as to FISA applications when that process is conducted appropriately. To begin with, FISA surveillance application must include an affidavit from a federal law enforcement officer, correct?
That's correct.
And that affidavit must demonstrate cause to believe that the target of the surveillance is an agent of a foreign power. Is that also right?
Right. If it relates to a U.S. citizen, it has to be that they're a knowing agent. If it's a non-U.S. person, a knowing element is not required.
And it is intended that that affidavit should rely upon reasonable, trustworthy information, is it not?
That's correct.
Right. And in some cases, in including the case of Carter Page, those affidavits, that information can include the use of information obtained from a confidential human source, correct?
That's correct.
And when information from a confidential human source is included, would you agree that it's important that material related to the reliability or trustworthiness of that confidential human source is disclosed within the affidavit?
Yes.
And I believe you testified here earlier today that in this case, information in that Carter Page application related to the reliability and credibility of the confidential human source was not included in these applications. Is that right?
I believe that's correct.
Okay. Would you tell us, in your experience, in your many years working with the department, why is it important that that type of information is included and disclosed to both federal prosecutors and to the court?
There's, when matters are submitted to the court, it's for a reason, or to a judge. It's to let an independent judicial officer weigh the question as to whether probable cause exists or not. In providing that information to independent, objective judicial officers, judicial magistrates, if there's confidential human source information that's being provided, it's important for the person, the judge who's reviewing this, to know what's the basis of the person's knowledge. Is it hearsay, or do they have personal knowledge, as an example? And then whether or not there's some track record or basis to believe that the information would be credible coming from this person.
And of course, at this stage of the proceeding, the person who's the subject of the investigation has no idea that this application is even being made or considered or reviewed by the court in most cases. So
That's
it's
correct.
solely rests with the government, the responsibility to ensure that this power, that this surveillance power that's being used is being done in a way that is appropriate and compliant with the law.
That's correct.
And you mentioned something earlier about that
Okay,
in
I'm
this
at the-
case,
go ahead and
agents
stop
immediately.
Here. So she's not really making any new points we don't already know, but I think that's a good conclusion. So at this point, we're about 2 hours and 43 minutes into this video. I'm trying to decide as far as part 2, if we'll just continue on from here or just skip a little bit forward in the video. For you 4 individuals still watching, thank you for joining me through this self-learning excursion of the trial in Congress with John Durham. Looking through the comments here, I don't see any additional questions. So I'll go ahead and close this stream, and if I choose to upload a part 2, I would likely start a secondary stream tomorrow or the day after. Hope you enjoyed the hearing. Have a good evening.